Nacogdoches Planning and Zoning Commission meeting for May the 10th. It is now 5:11. We'll get the meeting started. If we could, we'll all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Next on the agenda will be our open forum. Nacogdoches Planning and Zoning Commission welcomes public comments at regularly scheduled meetings. In addition to public comment on an agenda items, the commission offers an open forum whereas citizens may comment on governance issues over which the city of Nacogdoches has domain. In accordance with the Texas Open Meetings Act, members of the commission shall not discuss, deliberate, or make any decisions on topics not posted on the agenda item. Speakers should address all remarks to the commission and limit your remarks to no more than 3 minutes. I will open the open forum for anyone that'd like to stand up and speak. Okay. Seeing none, we will move on to agenda item number 4, the consent agenda. Actually, no, do you have, actually I think Elena has a request real quick.
Hi, Lana Chafin, City Planner. Whenever we get to agenda number 5, the regular agenda, staff requests that we move agenda item number 5E and 5F up just after 5B. We have a scheduling conflict with one of our staff members, and so we were hoping to push that agenda item up just a little bit.
Okay. So I'll make a motion to adjust our agenda items from 5E and F. We'll move up to behind 5B. Is there a motion for that?
So move.
I'll so move, that's fine.
And I'll second that.
Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Wonderful. We'll move on to agenda item number 4, the consent agenda. All matters listed under the consent agenda are considered routine by the commission and will be enacted by one motion. These items include final plats where staff has found compliance with all minimum subdivision regulations. All items approved by the consent agenda are approved with any and all staff recommendations. Since there will be no separate discussion of these items, citizens wishing to address the commission regarding one or more of these items on the consent agenda may address the commission at this time as well. If any commissioner desires to discuss an item on the consent agenda, it may be moved to regular agenda for further discussion, or further consideration. The only thing that we have on there this evening is approval of minutes, to consider the minutes from our April 12th meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission. If y'all will look over those.
I do have one comment. Did it adjourn at 5:24? Does that sound? That sounds really early.
I think we were here longer than that, weren't we?
Oh, it was probably meant to be 6:24.
Yeah.
Felt like 8:24.
Yeah, Commissioner Depish, if you'd like to make a motion to approve the minutes with the correction of the adjourn time, we'll make sure that that's included before the minutes are signed.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll make a motion to approve the minutes as written, just modifying the under number, under the adjourn time, modifying that to 6:24 p.m.
Is there a second?
A second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Carries. All right, we'll move on to, do we have anything under A, the consideration, discussion, and possible action on items removed from the consent agenda? Commission, we don't have anything on that, do we?
No, there were no items removed, so we can just move on to the next
Perfect.
one.
All right, so we'll move on to letter B. Public hearing, consider a request for approval of historic overlay for lots 29 and 5-B, City Block 35, located at 500 Forbes Street. This request has been submitted by David W. Peterson, Jr., case number HO 2021-002.
And we do have Hannah Anderson, Community Services Assistant Director, remoting in to provide that presentation. Hannah?
Thank you, Elena. Let me get my PowerPoint started. Am I going to be able to, Justin, share my screen?
Yes, there should be an option on the bottom right-hand side where you can present.
Oh,
Your-
there we go.
Yeah, give me 1 second.
I think
I'll help her out.
I think I got it.
Okay. If not, I can pull it up on my side as well.
Okay, here we go. I'll look good on y'all's end?
Looks good.
Okay, thank you so much. You'd think after a year of this, we would be smoother. Okay, so this request is for historic overlay for lots 29 and 5B, block 35, located at 500 Forbes Street. The applicant is David W. Peterson Jr., and he is on this call in case there are any questions for the applicant. The residence in question was constructed in 1899, although the builder is unknown. And this is for individual designation, which means it's outside of any specific historic district. But those properties get the same guidelines and regulations as anything under any of the other historic districts. And so the applicant's packet, it says the borough's house embodies the folk Victorian architectural style and effectively provides a historic anchor for the neighborhood at the crest of Virginia Avenue. Despite the communal optimism of intermittent historic homeowners in this neighborhood, many structures have succumbed to rental decline, including several folk Victorians. And that is the architectural structure of this property. As you can see on your screen, it is not one of the more elaborate architectural styles, but it's more of a vernacular, simple style that you can see in other places in academic. And applicant provided several photos of the property. So Forbes is eligible under criteria number 4. It embodies the distinctive characteristics of a type or period of architecture or method of construction. He mentions in the application packet that parts of the design were notable to Diedrich Rolfs, and however, it was not designed by Diedrich Rolfs. It just has characteristics that are seen in his styles. So this case was heard by HLPC on May 3rd, so that was last week, and whether it is approved or not by Planning and Zoning, it will move forward to City Council on May 18th for final approval. This is a map showing where the property is located. As you can see, there are 5 other properties under historic overlay in that vicinity, and Virginia Ave is located just to the south. So it's there in the center of the screen. That is where this property would be. These are the other structures that are under historic overlay, each of them individually designated. So as you can see, they're all quite simple in their architectural style, and they're all from either just before the turn of the century or just after. So I'm happy to answer any questions at this time. Let me stop presenting.
So when that map shows,
If any,
I'm sorry, when that map shows outside, what does that mean? Whenever they had that map, it had the Virginia avenues, but then it had other little blue areas that said outside. I was just trying to get a bearings on what that means.
So those are the other individually designated properties. So those are under historic overlay, but because they weren't part of a historic district, they're individually designated. So that's what that means. That's what this property will be.
I see. Right outside the Virginia Avenue obviously is the historic area there, but then you have the outside, just those certain little pockets there of each of those houses.
Exactly.
Got it.
Ms. Anderson, I'm assuming the HLPC approved this request?
Oh, yes, they did approve it.
Okay.
Any other questions? Thank you very much, Ms. Anderson.
You're welcome. Thank you.
This is an open meeting. Is there anyone that'd like to speak for or against on this matter? Okay. Seeing that there is none, are we ready to move forward with the motion to accept or deny, I think? Okay. I'd entertain a motion for or against to designate this 500 Forbes Street under historic overlay. Is there somebody for or against?
I'll make a motion to approve, including lots 29 and 5B, City Block 35, located at 500 Forbes Street, under the historic overlay, and as written in the application here for case file HO number 2021-002.
Is there a second?
I second.
All those in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Wonderful. Motion carries. We'll move on to, we're gonna skip, like I said, down to agenda item number, letter E, preliminary plan, presentation, discussion, and possible action regarding waiver request to the subdivision ordinance section 90-186 cul-de-sac and section 90-216 blocks, and a presentation, discussion, and possible action regarding a preliminary plan for Spring Creek Estates subdivision on approximately 180.8 acres, generally located east of 2609, approximately 4,100 feet north of County Road 215.
All right, thank you, Elena Chafin, City Planner. This is a revised preliminary plan for Spring Creek Estates. This subdivision is located outside the city limits, but is within the city's extraterritorial jurisdiction. So we do have subdivision authority, review and approval over areas that are in our ETJ. This property is almost fully developed. You can look on the screen, the small white lines are the parcel lines, so you can see that this subdivision has been developing for quite some time. It was, the original plan was approved in 2000, and subsequent phases have been approved since then. This property is located off of FM 2609, otherwise known as Appleby Sand Road, and this is a single-family residential subdivision consisting of approximately 180 acres. As of today, there's 201 existing lots, 30 future or proposed lots, and the next proposed phase is Phase 5, which is the next item on this agenda. This preliminary plan does require variances to the zoning ordinance, including sections 90-186 cul-de-sac and section 90-216 blocks. So on your screen, you see the original preliminary plan that was approved in 2000. This shows general layout of the lots. It also shows the street connectivity. And so fast forward till today, the density has increased, but generally the lot layout and street layout has been the same and is consistent with what was originally approved. The original preliminary plan was approved with a variance to cul-de-sac for a 1500 street being Spring Creek Drive. Since then, future additional phases have extended the length of Spring Creek Drive. And in 2012, there was a variance that was approved. And during that meeting, there's some discussion between the developer and staff and the Planning and Zoning Commission about concerns for additional connectivity and looping the streets to provide more access and circulation for the development. There's been a couple of subsequent smaller phases since then, but we wanted to show you what's been built, what's been proposed, and then what's in plan for the future. So on your screen, you'll see the overall preliminary layout. The area that's highlighted in blue, that's what's been built today. The area highlighted in red, that's Phase 5. That's the subdivision that's also on the agenda. And then the yellow is the future phase. So this property is encumbered by a large utility and drainage area. And so that final phase will essentially be 3 lots. The majority of it will be kept open just because of building constraints. And so whenever we looked at this, the potential for a looping or connectivity really didn't add any additional benefit as far as providing additional circulation or connectivity based on the fact that there's only 3 additional lots after this next proposed phase. So while there are variances that are required with this preliminary plan, we find that there's been no substantial change to the development layout or the street connectivity from what was originally approved, and so staff does recommend approval of the variances as outlined in the staff report. So just to give you an example of what block length is, we provided some samples here. I think it's been a while since the commission's heard of variance for block length or for cul-de-sac. So block length is essentially a measurement of the linear distance along a block face that's bounded on both ends by a through street. So here, the example is City Hall. We front Pilar Street, and then we're bounded by South Pecan and then South Fredonia through streets. So that section of street between those would be a block. And what the subdivision ordinance says is that every so many feet, you have to break that block with additional streets to provide connectivity and access and things of that nature. But with the proposed development, again, the subdivision's been built out as originally proposed. There have been no substantial changes in connectivity, so the extension of these streets doesn't impose any really conflicts with the intent of the subdivision ordinance, and it's not detrimental to the development itself. So these are just the specific variances outlined on your screen. They are specifically for Clearview Lane and Spring Creek Drive, and these are the lengths for the cul-de-sac, streets in a cul-de-sac, and these are the various variances and their dimensions for the block length. And so I've highlighted those in red for you. The street highlighted in red, that is the Spring Creek Drive, and purple is the Clearview Lane. Again, for approving a variance, there are conditions that the Planning and Zoning Commission must find that are satisfied in order to recommend approval. The first one is a finding that there are special circumstances or conditions affecting the land involved, such that the strict application of the chapter would deprive the applicant of the reasonable use of the land. The second being that the variance is necessary for the preservation and enjoyment of the property. The third being that the granting of the variance will not be detrimental to the public health or safety or welfare of the property or other property in the area, and that the granting of the variance will have the effect of will not have the effect of preventing the orderly subdivision of other land in the area. Again, the subdivision has been built out per the originally 2000 preliminary plan. We find that, again, there's been no substantial deviation from that, and so staff does recommend approval of the variances. The applicant and property owner are also in attendance if the commission should have any questions, and that concludes our presentation, and we'll open it up for any questions from the commission.
Anyone have any questions for, the only question I've got is in this phase 5, and I just hadn't counted them, 1, 2, 3, so there's about, it's not that phase 5 is, there's not a whole lot of lots there, I can't see how many, but it's not.
Yeah, so for phase 5, this is an image of the phase 5
28 lots.
final plat. Yes, it's about 28 lots is the next phase, and then after that, there's 3 additional lots. All are going to be reserved for single-family development.
How big are these big lots gonna be at the back?
They are each over a quarter each, and I don't have that approximate acreage. Mike, do you know offhand?
That's all right, I was just trying to get a rough idea. There's 3 big lots in the back, I was just wondering how big those were.
Mhm.
So this, really what this boils down to is there's not enough room here to do anything else. That's basically what we're saying.
Correct, and really, the last remaining phase is severely encumbered, and so only those front pieces are really developable, and so the remaining acreage will remain as unusable open space. And so if the property owner was requesting a lot more density and more lots in the future, then it would be a different discussion. We would be requesting additional street connectivity, some more looping, but in this case, the looping doesn't really add any substantial benefit based on everything that's already been built to date. So this is the second to last final phase, and the property owner plans to wrap up the development quite soon.
So in other words, you're just adding, realistically, you'd have the 28 single-family lots and then the 3 other lots in the back, the bigger lots, and so your 31, 32 houses is all you're really talking about. And so the density, like you're saying, as far as looping, it wouldn't benefit because, it's not if you were developing this other with another 60 or 70 lots, then maybe a different discussion, in other words, right? Okay.
Absolutely correct.
The looping's a concern with, what, traffic circulating through the subdivision?
Yes, with traffic circulating through the subdivision, with response times, utility providers, first responders, things of that nature. And again, I think if that last phase looks like phase 5, then we'd be requesting some additional connectivity. But in this case, the looping for the 3 additional lots, just the cost outweighs the benefit.
Okay.
Any other questions for Lana?
No questions from me.
Okay.
And so staff is looking for a recommendation to approve the preliminary plan with the variances as outlined in the staff report.
Okay.
Here we go. All right, well, I'll make a motion, unless we're gonna have any open.
This item is not subject to public
Okay.
hearing.
I'll make a motion to approve the preliminary plan, as presented to the commission, with the findings that there are definitely special circumstances, which, the strict application of the subdivision ordinances would deprive the applicant of the reasonable use of the land, that the variance is necessary for the preservation and enjoyment of the property rights of the applicant. It will not be detrimental to public health, safety, or welfare, or injurious to other property in the area. And the granting of the variance will not have the effect of preventing the orderly subdivision of other land in the area in accordance with the chapter on subdivision ordinances.
Is there a second? Anybody out there? Did y'all fall asleep on me?
I put him to sleep.
Is there a second for that motion?
I'll second it, but does the motion carry all of those things he named off?
Yes.
It does. Don't make him read it again.
Okay.
No, I'm just kidding. And
All
those in
right,
favor-
I'll second it then.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right, motion carries. All right. We'll move on to agenda item F, final plat. Consider approval of the final plat for the Spring Creek Estates Phase 5 subdivision located at the north and southeast corner of FM 2609 and Spring Creek Drive.
All right, thank you, Elena Chafin, City Planner. This is Spring Creek Estate Subdivision Phase 5. Now that the revised preliminary plan has been approved with all of the variances previously outlined, this development does comply with the subdivision regulations, and staff does recommend approval. The request includes 21.1 acres, and this is 28 single-family residential lots. This item does not require a public hearing.
Okay. So again, we just make a motion for or against it, in other words?
Yes.
I'll entertain a motion for or against approving Spring Creek Estates Phase 5 as it's shown.
I so move, Brother Chair, that we approve it.
Thank you, Mr. Mills. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Wonderful. That is approved as well, and we will move on to, we'll go back to letter C, public hearing, consider a zone change from B2 general business to R1 single family for block 2 of the Linden Grange addition located at 120 Cross Street. The request has been made or submitted by Linda Holmes, CISC, case file ZON 2021-03.
All right, thank you, Elena Chafin. This request is for a zone change from B2 general business to R1 single family for approximately 0.3 acres of land again, located at 120 Carl Street. The R1 district is intended for low-density, single-family uses, and lots in this district must be at least 8,250 square feet. The applicant does own the subject property, which is, again, part of the Linden Grange addition, and intends to develop the lot as a single-family residence. The Linden Grange addition was subdivided in 1968, prior to the adoption of our zoning ordinance. And at that time, there were deed restrictions imposed on the subdivision that restricted the development to single family. You'll notice that there are 2 vacant lots at the beginning of Carl Street where it intersects with North Street. Those are also Zone B2. Those are also owned by the HOA, and those have been owned and maintained by the HOA since the property was originally subdivided. And those are actually reserved as a buffer between the actual single-family development and North Street.
So both those in-lots are, you said buffers, correct?
Yes, those in-lots are owned by the HOA, and those are restricted as a natural buffer and open space
Understood.
between the development and North Street. The remaining portion of Carl Street is zoned single-family, except for the lot immediately north of the subject property, which is also zoned B2 general business. Whenever the city adopted the zoning ordinance in 1970, they essentially took our major thoroughfares and rezoned those commercial. And so it was essentially a measurement from the center line. Those properties became commercial. But again, this subdivision was established prior to that. And so it's always been and intended to be developed as a single-family residence. There's also single-family immediately to the south and single-family immediately to the north and the east, with the commercial development primarily fronting that North Street corridor. The subject property is designated as business, commercial, but the future land use map is not a specific parcel by parcel mandate. It's really just a visual demonstration on how property should generally be developed, almost like a crayon swath versus being parcel specific. The future land use plan does show single family for the remainder of the Carl Street subdivision. And this request also furthers the land use policies in the comprehensive plan that further infill development and encourage residential development where infrastructure already exists, such as water, streets, utilities, and so forth and so on. These are some site photos of the subject property. We actually have a building permit that's been submitted, and whenever we reviewed it, that's when we put the property owner on notice that a zone change was required. At that time, they had already completed some site work, so that's what you see there, that disturbed dirt. They had already kind of started putting the pad, but we asked them to suspend those activities until we were able to process the zone change request. If you look next door, that's another single-family residence, and as you continue down the street, it's just more single-family residential development. We sent written notices to all the property owners within 200 feet. We also sent postcard courtesy notices to all the property owners within 500 feet. These notices also included letters to the HOA, and we put a sign on the property. Since the time when we wrote the staff report and published the agenda, we had received several responses in favor of the request. Since then, we actually received an additional letter in support, and we placed those at your places, and we also emailed them to the commission. So with that, staff finds that the request is compatible with the adjacent development. Again, the majority of the subdivision being developed as single family. It does not prevent the orderly growth of adjacent property, as the vacant lot to the east is actually maintained, owned, and reserved by the HOA as open space. There's already adequate utilities and infrastructure at this location. All drives and parking will comply with current residential development standards. There will be, if the zone change is approved, there won't be any other uses allowed other than residential, single family, so the zone change should not create a nuisance for adjacent developments. And then all lighting and landscaping will comply with our current standards. And with that, staff does recommend approval of the request. And I believe the applicant is in attendance, and at this time, we'll take any questions from the commission before we open it up for the public hearing.
Someone have any questions for Alana? No questions. I don't have any. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. This is an open meeting, so if anybody would like to speak for or against, feel free to step up and state your name and speak for or against. Okay. Seeing no one, guess we can Go ahead and entertain a motion to change this zone change from B2 general business to R1 single family for Lot 2 of Block 2 of Linden Grange addition, located at 120 Crawl Street. Anyone want to make a motion for it?
I'll make a motion to, for zone change from B2 general business to R1 single family for Lot 2, Block 2 of the Linden Grange addition, sorry, ZON 2021-03. That we approve that change.
Is there a second for that?
I'll second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right, motion carries. We'll move on to D. No, I'm sorry.
5D.
Huh?
5D.
Got it, okay. 5D, consider a zone change from R1 single family to B2 general business for lot OL 49, City Block 43 as described in a deed dated July 17th, 2020, recorded in document number 2020-4460 of the real property records of Nacogdoches County, located on the south side of West Main Street, approximately 200 feet west of Bremont Street. The request has been submitted by Brent Ivy of Ivy Got Property LLC, case file ZON 2021-04.
All right, thank you, Lana Chafin. Again, this request is a zone change from R1 single family to B2 general business. The property is approximately 1 acre, located on the south side of West Main Street, just east of Bremont Street. The general business zoning district is intended to accommodate those business activities that are oriented towards the automobile or whose operations may require limited truck access. Generally, this district is located along major traffic arteries where strip business development already exists. The applicant owns a subject property in the tracts located immediately to the east and west for a total of 2.2 acres. And the applicant does intend to develop the property with commercial uses and potentially a restaurant. Again, the subject property is zoned R1 single family and is currently vacant. If you look at the zoning map, you see that there's a mix of different zoning districts in the area. Primarily, the properties that actually front West Main Street are zoned commercial or industrial. And then once you get past the commercial zonings, it transitions to residential development. So on the south side of West Main Street, it transitions to R1 single family. And then on the north side of West Main Street, it transitions to R4 multifamily. There are also some single-family residences that are developed along North Street, but are also zoned B2, and these are considered legal non-conforming uses. The remaining properties that front West Main Street are actually developed as commercial as well, and they include some industrial uses along Bremont, and then as you travel west along West Main Street, you have more of your retail, commercial, strip-type development. The future land use plan does designate this area as single family, and then to the east, it's rural development. That's primarily because of the Bonita Creek and floodplain that's in that area, and so there's very limited developability. Now, the property that the applicant owns that's designated as floodplain, there are no buildings proposed on that property, so it
is there
should.
some floodplain on it? Just a little
Yes,
bit, a
so-
little bitty red?
So that red is that 500-year floodplain, which is very limited, and then as you travel east, that's where the majority of the floodplain and floodway is located. So as I said, the subject property is actually designated as single family, and single family is described as your conventional one-family detached dwellings in the comprehensive plan. And while the subject area surrounded, while the surrounding area is also designated as single family, again, the future land use map isn't a rigid parcel specific mandate, and so when we're looking at these requests, we look at the comprehensive plan as a whole. We look at the future land use plan, the thoroughfare plan, and then we look at the land use policies they're outlined to see if it's otherwise in compliance with the comprehensive plan. And so in order to harmonize land uses in the area, it's always prudent to consider the predominant use or zoning that's also in the area and then allocate those zoning districts appropriately. So again, there's the frontage along West Main Street is primarily zoned commercial and industrial with a mix of commercial and industrial development, as well as some older single-family development that was developed prior to the adoption of our zoning ordinances. We find that this request does further some of the land use policies that are outlined in the comprehensive plan, including encouraging infill development where appropriate, where you already have utilities and infrastructure in place. This West Main Street is also designated as a major arterial on the thoroughfare plan, which is really designated for your heavy traffic areas and your roadways that can accommodate that heavy traffic that's associated with commercial development. And so while the future land use plan does designate single family for this area, staff does find that it is not otherwise in keeping with some of the land use policies and objectives of the comprehensive plan. These are some site photos taken from West Main Street. You see that the subject property is vacant, it's pretty flat, and then on the south and west side of the property, there's actually a large vegetative buffer that separates the property from some of those adjacent zoning districts. Just some more photos of the subject property. You can see that the zoning sign that's been placed along West Main Street. We did send written notices to all the property owners within 200 feet, and then a courtesy postcard notices to all the property owners within 500 feet. And when we wrote the staff report and issued the agenda packet, we hadn't received any input based on that, but since then we've received 2 written letters in support of the request. One from Mr. Fred Hooper. He actually owns the property or the home immediately west of the subject property. And then we received one from Mr. Westmore, and he owns property to the east. And we printed those out and put them at your places, and we also emailed them to Commissioner Malott and Commissioner Mills. So those were received after we posted the agenda, so we wanted you to have those at your place. With that, that concludes staff's presentation, and the applicant is also in the audience if the commission should have any questions. And at this time, we'll open it up for questions before we open the public hearing.
So realistically, everything around it, like it says, I mean, is B2 or I2 or industrial or business too, so it just, it's kind of an anomaly that it is R1 realistically, it looks like.
And at one point in time, this property was zoned B2 general business, and then when the property to the south was rezoned to single family, this parcel was included, but it wasn't included in the original development, so it's kind of left behind. And so now it's, you're right, it's kind of this random yellow
Cleaning
square.
it up, in other words, it seems like. Okay. Any other questions for Elena? Okay. Again, this meeting is an open meeting, so anybody like to speak for or against, feel free to step up and speak on behalf of this zoning change. Okay. Seeing none, we will move forward with any other thoughts or discussion that needs to be discussed? Okay. We will open it for a motion for or against to change the zoning from R1 to B2. General business for lot OL 49, City Block 43 is described in the July 17, 2020 recorded documents, number 2020-4460 of the real property records of Nacogdoches County. Is there a motion for or against?
I move that we approve the request.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Wonderful. Thank you very much, and we'll move on to agenda item G. G, don't I?
Oh, that's good. All right, thank you. Elena Chafin, City Planner. This is a variance to the sign ordinance for a wall sign that exceeds the allowed sign area requirements for property located at 4608 North Street. This request has been submitted by Stacy Bryan with Humble Sign Company, and they are also on this call. So if the commission has any questions for the applicant, they are available. This is a tenant space that's located in an existing shopping center. If you remember, this is where the Staples was previously located, and Specs is the new tenant, and with that comes new signage, and their proposal exceeds the maximum allowed based on our ordinance, and thus they are requesting a variance. The property is zone B2 general business, so the proposed land use is fine. This is a key map. This was also included in your packet from the permit application. And so the freestanding sign, which you see along the North Street, that is not subject to any kind of variance. It meets all of our requirements, so the the freestanding sign is fine. What we're looking at is sign A and B, and these are attached to the wall. One faces North Street and the other faces Rose Lake Drive. And so this exhibit shows the sign that's proposed on the front of the building that faces North Street. This is sign A. The proposed sign area is 101, I'm sorry. The proposed sign area for all the signs is 101 square feet. The allowed sign area, wait, I'm sorry, let me back up just for a moment. Wall signage is based on your building frontage, so the actual width of your building or the width of your tenant space within that building that faces the public street. This space has just over 67 feet of building frontage. Based on that, the maximum allowed sign area for wall signs is 101 square feet. All of the combined signs are 368 square feet in area, which exceeds the maximum by 267. This particular sign, the one that faces North Street, the combined sign area for these two are 250 square feet. The actual specs lettering is 150, and then the logo is 100 square feet. And this is what will actually be facing directly to North Street. Also, you'll see that there is a building between the tenant space and North Street, so there is a little bit of a visual barrier, but other than that, the remaining portion of the building faces directly onto North Street. This is the north side of the building, so the sign that faces Rose Lake Drive, and the proposed sign area for this is 118 square feet, and you can see the before and after based on what's there today.
So the Hibbett sign would come down?
Yes, correct. And this is just the tenant space that they will occupy on the freestanding sign. Again, this complies with all of our requirements. They're not proposing any changes. It was just included in the overall permit application, so we wanted it to be available to the commission. These are some site photos of the building. There's been some interior and exterior renovation done. This is the particular space that specs will occupy. And these are just some additional photos from the parking lot, just giving an idea of visually where the sign will be located.
There's two spots there, right?
Yes, so they took the staples and turned it into two. So one at the very end will be specs, and then the other remaining portion will be immunotech. Thank you. It's considered like a medical office use. And I think laboratory testing associated with medical things of that nature. And so the actual permit plans have been approved for the interior and exterior renovations. And so the only thing for this particular property that's requiring a variance is the sign. Everything else associated with the building permit has already been approved.
Okay, so walk me through the size requirements again. So on the sign on the, so the sign up by the street is fine. So then the sign on the end of the building, what are we working with there? Let's start with the
Yeah, so what you see as
B.
circled B, that's facing Rose Lake Drive, that is proposed to be 118 square feet.
Okay.
And A, that will face North Street, that does have some visibility issues with the building. In front of it, that will be 250
Got it.
square feet. So in total, the request is for 368 square feet. The amount allowed is 101 square feet, and that's based on the actual length of the tenant space that faces a public street. So in this case, the length of that storefront that faces North Street, that's what that calculation is based on. If this were a single occupant building, they could actually use both street frontages. They could use Rose Lake Drive and North Street and count those towards their total, street frontage. So they'd have a larger sign area. But because it's a multi-tenant building, we have to just base it on each individual tenant space and the length of that faces a public street. So on Rose Lake Drive, that's actually just the side of the building, and there's only one tenant that actually can benefit from that particular frontage because they're at the end of the building.
Hibbett sports sign will go away, you said correct?
Yes,
How
correct.
big is that Hibbett sports sign if you had to calculate the square feet?
It looks bigger than specs.
It is. And I wasn't able to go back and track the original permit of when that was done. We only maintain records for those particular permits for a certain amount of years. Now, I will tell you that their frontage is a lot smaller. And so this could have been something that was approved as like an overall sign package, but because of it predated some of our tracking, I wasn't able to find the original permit.
Out of curiosity, why wouldn't they, the person that owns the building, want to give everyone a small sign that faces basically Walmart? Instead of putting one tenant sign on the end, why wouldn't you put all of them?
I'm not sure. It's an excellent question. It could be, and I wish the property owner was here to elaborate on that. It could be that Hibbett Sports has the least amount of building frontage because it is a narrow tenant space. That could be why. So they're not allowed to have as much freestanding, they're not allowed to have as much wall signage as some of the others because they're more narrow. But unfortunately, that I don't believe the property owner is here to answer that. But that's an excellent question.
You can get a signed variance if there's a hardship.
Yes, and we are about to get to that in just a moment. So there is criteria that the commission must find affirmative as far as conditions for approval of the request. Those are outlined in your screen, and we went over those in our last meeting as well. Based on the criteria and staff's technical review, we did not find that there was a really unique circumstance or physical hardship for the subject property because Staples was there for so long and their signage complied with all of our current requirements. Now, they did have a larger tenant space, and so it being broken up into two does really limit the individual size of each tenant's sign. Staff does recommend denial of the request just because it does not meet all of the criteria outlined above. And now the applicant is attending the meeting remotely, and so they are available for any questions. Now, looking at the aerial, like I pointed out earlier, you will see that there is an actual building that's part of the shopping center that's located in front of where the specs will be. So that could be considered a hardship, but it's not a unique circumstance because we find those in other shopping centers in town as well. But I did want to point that out to the commission so you can take that into consideration during your deliberations. This item does not require a public hearing. And so that does conclude staff's presentation. I'm more than happy to answer any more of the commission's questions. And like I said, Stacy, the applicant, she's also available if the commission has any questions.
So realistically, what you're saying is that they can only have you said 101 square feet?
Yes, based on that width of that tenant space that faces North Street, because that's really the only public street that the tenant space faces. Yes, it's 101 square feet.
Can you explain how you calculate the square footage?
Yes, I can.
It's not done letter by letter.
No. So there's two different ways to do it. You can either draw a rectangle around the entire area of the sign and do it that way, or if the sign is broken up into separate images or separate sections, then you can break it up. And so in this case, you have one sign area based on the logo itself, and a rectangle that completely encompasses that area, and then the specs portion as well. Now, we have had applicants come back in the future and actually do letter by letter if there's a clear delineation and we can actually measure that. And so in this case, I think they could come back and do that, but you see that there's some of the letters actually connect, and so I'm not sure that they would gain enough additional square feet to actually still comply with the requirements, just because there's not a clear separation between each individual letter. Does that make sense? And so that's how we calculate that. We try to be as flexible as possible and allow people to get as much signage as they can, but based on the regulations outlined in the ordinance.
Okay. And the intent on limiting the sign size is just aesthetic?
Yes, so the main premise of the sign ordinance, one is for aesthetics. It's also for safety. When you're driving down the street, you don't want to look like Houston and just have signs, huge signs everywhere, pylon signs, freestanding signs that can actually be a distraction for the driver. So it's safety as well as aesthetics. Most sign ordinance help create a certain character for the particular community. in which it serves. And so this helps maintain character based on other commercial developments, and it also speaks to safety to limit undue distractions of drivers passing by. Now, I will say that the sign ordinance was written a while back, and we are in need of a sign ordinance revision, especially based on some Supreme Court cases that were approved a few years ago. But we would like to do a overhaul, a really holistic revision to our sign ordinance. And so that will be coming soon. But this is the ordinance that we are working within today, which is why we have a process for variance that the commission may approve alternatives based on individual requests.
So my question to you is, realistically, I know obviously I understand that Specs is taking half the space that Staples was, but Staples' sign had to have been fairly close to this same size as far as signage and that sort of thing before, as far as their letter size and all that, when this front pylon, wouldn't you say it was probably fairly close?
Yes, and I believe, because they really didn't have any additional logos, it was just the lettering, that they used those individual letter cabinets to calculate that sign area. And so, you know, if you remember, they had a large white background with the red lettering. Well, that entire area wasn't included in their sign area. It was just the cabinet lettering that we included. And so while it looks like a large sign, the area calculation was much smaller than that, because we don't punish people for just having a blank background to their sign. But again, I will say that while it's not a unique circumstance, there is a physical condition that, because the tenant space has now been divided between 1 to 2, and there is that existing building that does have the effect of limiting some of that limiting the visibility of some of that wall signage. And so the reason that staff didn't recommend approval is because that's not a unique circumstance. We find that in other subdivisions, which is why we have provisions for pylon signs that allow for multiple tenants. So even if their wall sign isn't really visible, they still have that sign out by the street that allows people to that allows them to get some space for their advertising and so forth and so on. And I believe the applicant is available, and I don't know if she'd like to make a statement to the commission. Stacy?
Yes, I'd like to add another hardship. I know we're pointing out that we do have the multi-tenant sign closer to the roadway, but we do have a large setback there as well. The building sets back 400 and I want to say 10 feet from North Street. So, you know, the further the setback, of course, you know, the harder the visibility, and of course with the additional building there obstructing the view. The other thing, I could have it revised to show exactly the square footage of the lettering and the logo if that was needed. Our designers would be able to pull out just the square footage of the bunny with the blue backer and the Specs letters, if that would help.
And those are individual, it's not one large sign?
No, ma'am, those would be individual.
Okay.
So again, that would be similar to that Staples sign, where it'd just be the cabinet where just the letters themselves, and then like you said, the bunny, so then
Yeah.
the square footage should go down then, correct?
Yes, and it still
Tremendously.
includes a rectangular shape, so it wouldn't be something that actually is like just the lettering. We draw an imaginary rectangle that completely encompasses the area, and so that's how we calculate that area. Now, for the actual Specs lettering, they could actually take each individual letter and calculate that area, and it might get them
Quite a bit
a small,
difference.
it could. Now, there's not a lot of space between those letters, so I'm not sure how much, because again, it's an imaginary rectangle that encompasses the entire letter. And so
I must
that
have
white
misunderstood.
space between, you're still gonna get some area from, you know, the white space between the lines in the E and the curves of the S, and so all that is still gonna be included.
And maybe I misunderstood, because I thought when you said
Yeah.
earlier about like Staples, that you just counted the square footage of just the cabinet for each letter, and so that's what I thought, maybe I misunderstood. 'Cause I
Yep.
thought-
Well, and depending on the spacing between those letters depends on how much square footage that gets them in that calculation.
Yeah.
And the sign on the end of the building will be the same.
Yes. This is the sign, the image you see on your screen now is a sign on the end of the building. And I'm just flipping through these images. If the commission would like me to flip back to a specific image, I'd be more than happy to do so or answer any questions.
So the way it is now, obviously, the signs would be at 101 square feet, it would be pretty small. I mean, I don't know what the
Yeah,
dimensions
I
are now.
don't- I don't even know.
Yes,
That would look silly.
Yeah, the dimensions now are the letters are 6'4" tall, and I don't know how wide, but yeah, if you go to that, they're gonna be, it's teeny weeny, I think.
yeah, the spec sign, so the image that you see on your screen is the storefront. And the lettering itself is,
6 foot tall.
it
6 foot
exceeds the
four.
maximum. And so, we've also made some changes and revisions to our ordinance, and so, again, because of the age of our permits, I wasn't able to go back and pull that. But it could have been that we had different calculations for signage area when this development was initially constructed. But anytime we have a change in occupancy or change in sign, it has to comply with current standards, so that could absolutely be a scenario where our previous ordinance maybe was a little bit more generous in our sign area. I know that we did go through an overhaul back in the 90s, and so it's very possible that the existing signage predated that.
I'll say this, the sign that's out at North Street is very, it's in an odd spot. People always are turning in there. They get into that lane to turn into the Walmart.
Yeah, it's usually pretty busy, so
Yes.
I think you lose a lot with that pylon sign for sure. I
Yeah.
agree. I mean, I don't know where you could put it where you wouldn't, but that's a pretty crazy intersection right
can't.
there, so I don't know that anybody, I don't know that I've ever even noticed it, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
And Ms. Bryan, I had a question for you. This is Ken Deppish, Commissioner.
But
I'm assuming you designed I don't know, did you design the sign, or are you the applicants?
I pull permits here at
Okay.
Humboldt Sign Co., but the Specs is one of our larger companies.
Okay.
They have their logo design that we go off of, and our
Mhm.
designers put the proofs and designs together.
Okay. I was just, my curiosity was, I'm assuming that it was sized like this to fit, for aesthetic purposes, to fit within the background. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. Are we talking about the wall sign?
Yes.
The front wall sign?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, sir. It's just, if you see it, like we pointed out before, that the bunny itself would be 100 square feet, just the bunny. So if we reduce that size, it's nearly invisible. I mean, it honestly looks, it looks really bad. It really aesthetically just doesn't look good. Everything gets distorted too small. So to us and the owner of the property, they really liked this size. This was just the size that seemed to work the best.
Okay.
And just to remind the commission, if you look through the criteria as outlined in the staff report, we did find that, the request, if it's approved, it will not be materially detrimental to the property owners in the vicinity. And if the sign variance is not approved, we do find that they can still have reasonable use of the property because there's a freestanding sign where they'll have tenant space. And while there is a hardship, it's not unique to the subject property. The commission could take into considerations those physical characteristics that you just described below in regards to the existing multi-tenant building in front of that tenant space and kind of the configuration of that freestanding sign along the frontage road and its proximity to that intersection. So I just wanted to point that out to the commission to consider during their deliberation.
Well, this is Commissioner Mills. I think it is a hardship because of the distance is from the road as well as the building in front of it. If you going north, you could not hardly see that sign until you get in front of the store to make the turn. If you going north, now if you going south, you could read the sign possibly, but if you're going north, especially with a smaller sign, it would be harder to read or see the building with a smaller sign. So I think it does create a hardship with the building, where our sign on North Street is located, as well as the other buildings on the south side of the parking lot in front of Staples. So it does create a hardship.
I agree with Mr. Mills on that.
I do as well. I
Me
think
too.
it's a little bit of a difficult place to see for sure.
I don't think people really pay attention to the street sign sitting at North Street.
And realistically, looking at with the front schematic of the building versus the signage, it's not grotesquely too large, or it doesn't, you know what I'm saying? It doesn't look out of place. I'll say that. I think if you went really tiny, it'll look
strange.
It'll look out of place, to be honest with you. I think aesthetically it looks, I'm sure that these graphic designers are very good at that and understanding laying out to make sure that the spacing is right. So I think
I
aesthetically.
find it odd though that only one name is on the end of the building.
There will be another, there may be additional signage because there is another tenant, but we haven't received permits for those yet, so.
And I think another hardship would be for Nacogdoches not to have new businesses come in based on the footage of a sign.
And I guess if we had to pick nits, we could say that maybe we could reduce the size of the sign on the end of the building slightly, but I'm not.
Yeah,
I think it
yeah.
still looks better than the Hibbett Sports sign that was there, so I'm generally okay with it.
I think Elena Chapin, city planner, I think as far as aesthetics, it's not out of place with some of the current signage that's there. I think the current signage is non-conforming.
Harbor Freight's sign is rather large too. I mean, I
But
know it's a
as
much
far
bigger
as-
space,
But as far as being consistent with some of the other signage in the area, I believe you're correct. It would not be tremendously out of place.
It's not gonna be any smaller or any larger if you have that. I bet you they're within the same family size, as far as, layout and that sort of thing, even Apex and all the others, I think, especially Harbor Freight's frontage is probably a pretty good sized sign. Again, I know it's a bigger building, but, I think I think it almost needs to conform like that as far as being similar in size to these others versus, having a small one at the end, so.
And I definitely think denial from your position is the correct thing to do, based on the ordinance, because you're kind of constrained, I think, on what can be approved. And I think you're right, we probably do need to revisit the entire ordinance.
And that is something that's on our plan of work as a priority. I don't think it's something that we plan on tackling this year, just because there's some other long-range planning initiatives that we'd like to move forward with, but we'd like to take a holistic view at it and really look at the entire ordinance as a whole. But the commission could also, as part of your authority, could direct staff to explore different things in our ordinance to make it more flexible, to allow more staff discrimination as far as approving small variances to the ordinance. Now, this is a substantial variance to the ordinance, so something like this would always be brought back to the commission. But we could explore other items where, if it's 5 square feet or 10 square feet or 10 feet, 15 square feet over the requirement, does it really need to come to this board for approval, or is that something that staff can approve at their discretion? But again, we did find this was a substantial
Understood.
deviation.
Anyone else have any questions for Mrs. Bryan?
Call from William.
Somebody's getting a call.
Call from William.
I don't have any other questions.
Thank you, Ms. Bryan. I appreciate you being here for this.
Thank you.
So I guess the question is there any other questions for Elena? Any other discussion that we need to talk about?
No.
Okay. Anybody like to make a motion for or against this variance, sign variance?
Sure. I'll make a motion to approve the variance on case file SV 0201, 02021 -02. It's too many twos and ones in there. For the following, as a hardship for the following factors, that the granting of the requested variance would not directly be materially detrimental to the property owners in the vicinity. There are unique conditions on the property, given its setback and screening from other buildings, and the poor signage, pylon sign on North Street. And also, I think it would, it's not going to affect safety or anything because of the location of the sign. I think it's just going to help people find the building. It's far enough off the road, it's not going to distract anyone. And it looks better, so that's the other thing.
Is there a second?
I'll second the motion.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right, my motion carries. We will move on to the last agenda item. 6, in discussion of possible action on future agenda items. A planning and zoning member may inquire about a subject for which notice has not been given, a statement of specific factual information, or the recitation of existing policy may be given. Any deliberation shall be limited to a proposal to place the subject on agenda for a subsequent meeting. Does anybody have any questions about anything that's going on in the city they have questions about, I guess?
Chairman, I would like to make an announcement. This week, we are conducting interviews for finalists for the comprehensive plan update and the downtown master plan. And so we are hoping to move forward with that quickly. We're very excited. We have some very highly qualified, highly experienced consultants. And so we hope to bring back a contract to City Council in June to finalize those and then start the process. So we just wanted to give you guys an update on where we were with that.
How long does a comprehensive plan usually, like say once you sign the contract, and what kind of time frame does it usually take?
The process can be anywhere from 12 to 18 months. And a lot of that is that public engagement process, where we actually reach out to the community and we start that visioning process to figure out what does the community want, how do we want to grow, is the city going in the right direction, and how do we want to?
Public input for sure.
Yes,
Correct.
that's the public input. And public engagement is very time intensive and really takes the majority of that time.
Very critical.
And then the downtown master plan can take anywhere from 9 to 12 months because it's a smaller area plan.
I would like to add something to the agenda. If we could have a discussion about what the city's ordinances would allow for undoing zoning changes that have already been done.
So a zone change is considered an ordinance to the zoning map, and the process for that is outlined by the Texas Local Government Code, and it essentially says a zoning map amendment has to be approved by the governing body of of that community after due public hearing and notice. And if that community has a zoning board or a zoning commission, then that item must first be heard by the zoning commission and a detailed report issued and delivered to the city council. And so that's with any zone change request, even if it's for a property that was recently changed. And so, for example, the property on Carl Street, that's going to be heard by city council on May 18th. The city council approves that. That's going to be considered an amendment to the zoning map. It gets approved as an ordinance. If the property were to come back 6 months later and say, I want to change that back to commercial, or city council decided we really think commercial is more appropriate for this area, then we would initiate that zone change process all over again. And we would
Who
bring
initiates it? Is it?
a private property owner could initiate a zone change. City council could initiate a zone change upon majority vote.
Okay.
So a city council member or a planning zoning commission member could request to place an item on a future agenda for discussion, and upon majority vote, initiate that zone change process. Staff could initiate a zone change process after a recommendation from city council. And so primarily it's from property owners, but often right after a long-range planning study like a comprehensive plan, you'll often see cities actually initiating zone changes in specific targeted areas to further the comprehensive plan.
Right.
And so it's not or for economic development efforts or
Right.
for something of that nature. But it follows the same exact process as if a private property owner were to submit that zone change request.
So for example, if you had something that was zoned agricultural for years and years and years, and you want to go in and make it, and you realize that it'd be a good industrial park, you change it to industrial because it's got light rail or whatever it may be, and so it's just, whatever that comprehensive plan looks like it would be, that's when it would get initiated by the city council. per se.
Yes, or the city council could adopt some economic development strategy that says we want to take all of the properties along our southeast Stallings Drive and change all those frontages to industrial or commercial or what have you. The city council could initiate that process with majority vote, and then city staff would begin that. So we would notify all the property owners within 200 feet. We'd put a legal notice in the paper. We'd bring the item to this commission for your review and consideration. After a public hearing, then you would make a recommendation to council, and then we would follow that process. So it's not a rescinding of a previous ordinance. It's just going through that process all over again. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question? And I can still bring this item to
can
future
any-
agenda.
Yeah, I'm just curious about if
Mm-hmm.
any property owner in the city limits can bring a change request.
Absolutely. Now, that doesn't mean that it necessarily is going to get approved, but we will process any request submitted by a property owner for a zone change.
Okay.
Anything else? Stephanie, Mr. Mills, y'all have any other thoughts, concerns, questions for Elena?
So back to the comprehensive plan, you mentioned the timetable that it takes for that to be finished.
Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned that you would hold public hearings. And that's before that comprehensive plan is final?
Yes, so the process is to select a consultant, and then we would take a contract forward to city council, and once that contract is approved, then we would move forward with next steps. Typically, that's a meeting with the consultant to kind of lay out the process and procedures. It does include a tremendous amount of public meetings and public forums and public engagement.
And what is that for?
That is to actually reach out to the community, because we want to make sure that anything that's recommended in the plan is a plan for the community, not staff's plan or the consultant's plan. Public buy-in is critical because it's a comprehensive plan for the community. And so we want to make sure that everyone's represented in that process, and that the comprehensive plan, the objectives, the policies, the goals are actually reflective of the values of the community as a whole. And so we really try hard to make sure that everyone's heard, that we garner everyone's input, because what you don't want to have is just a small sector of the community that shows up to public hearings be driving that process. And so it's all about trying to reach those segments that aren't traditionally involved in our public hearing
So
process and bring them to the table as well.
Okay, so once you get your public input and it's finalized, who, down the road, because this is a long-term plan,
Yes, ma'am.
who is going to, we brought this up before and it's never really been addressed.
Yes.
Who makes sure that these are done?
Well, there's different tools and strategies for that. Usually a comprehensive plan will actually have an implementation strategy section at the end that actually provides very specific tools and guidelines for how that plan is to be implemented. Sometimes they'll actually recommend that you create a task force. And that task force is tasked with making sure that that plan gets implemented. Sometimes it's city staff, maybe it's city staff and some members of other nonprofit communities. But usually there's actually a detailed plan that says who, what, when, where, and how these recommendations are actually going to be implemented. And so that's going to be a strong emphasis for this comprehensive plan process, is to make sure that not only is the plan representative of the community, but it's actually implementable and something that we can, that's feasible, that we can do. And it'll have, but there's multiple ways to do that. Usually there's also a annual review of the comprehensive plan, so that way we can keep up with, okay, this is what was approved, what have we done so far to implement that? Because there will be, usually there's like a short-range implementation, mid-range implementation, and long-range implementation. All right, this is what we're going to do in year 1, year 5, year 10, and traditionally you do an annual review, so that way you make sure that.
Have we had an annual review of the previous one?
I don't think there's been an annual review conducted in a number of years. I know that there's been a lot of turnover in the department, and so I can't say for sure, but I believe it's been quite some time since the last annual review. I know back in 2013, there was a pretty comprehensive review to look at what we've actually implemented so far based on what was originally adopted. And I can bring that back to a future agenda item if that's something that the commission will be interested in doing, revisiting that to see. Absolutely, that's something we can.
Are you the one that kind of drives the ship there then, once we get that report, or are you the one that's going to be in charge of doing all of that, I guess?
Yeah, the planning and zoning department will be the city side project manager for the comprehensive plan process.
How much did the last one cost?
Oh, gosh, I don't know. I can bring that back to a future agenda item if you like.
I'd be interested in knowing how much the last one cost and then what actually has been put into place from that plan.
And yes, absolutely. So I think on what we'll do for the next agenda item, we'll try to find that last report that was done on the comprehensive plan, and we'll also bring back that cost information as well. So we'll make a note of that.
Yeah, I'd just be interested to see, kind of what items were checked off of that list, just to see. 'Cause, again, like we've talked about in the past, I know it's going to be a big number for that, and just making sure that it's being beneficial.
Feasible, yeah.
Yeah, and I will say with this request for qualifications, we are asking for a little bit more than what you traditionally see in a comp plan, because we're asking for a housing needs assessment to help us address our housing shortages, and we're also asking for a detailed I-69 corridor plan. So those are things kind of above and beyond your traditional elements of a comprehensive plan. So we are anticipating that the cost will be a little bit more than what we traditionally see, but we hope to get more bang for our buck, because those public engagement costs tend to be the most expensive and time consuming. So if you do multiple elements at one time, it kind of helps cut some of that cost just as a matter of scale. But yes, we will schedule that for the June Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, and we'll bring that back.
Anything else?
Okay, that's good.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Stephanie, do you have anything else?
That's it.
Okay. Ken, are you good as well?
I'm good, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Mills, I think I'm good as well, so we'll adjourn this meeting. It is now 6:29. Thank you very much for everyone attending. Have a good evening.